You're listening to Inside Lebo, a podcast giving you an inside look at Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. Hosted by Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans and Assistant Public Information Officer and Online Editor Stephanie Hackey.
Welcome back to Inside Lebo. I'm your host, Assistant Municipal Manager and Municipal Planner Ian McMeans.
And I'm co-host, Assistant Public Information Officer and Online Editor Stephanie Hackey.
Welcome back, Stephanie.
Thank you. I was off for about 3 months having a little baby, so she's 3 months now and growing and strong and happy and full of personality, let me tell you.
That's awesome. That's great. Babies are wonderful. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
So today, Stephanie and I are going to discuss development projects. So one of my roles here in the municipality is municipal planner. So any new development projects come through my office for approval. So I'm going to hand over the hosting reins to Stephanie, and I will just answer questions today.
Yes, I'll be interviewing you. This is great. I love it. So tell us about development in Mount Lebanon, first of all. You know, is there a lot of development? What's going on with that?
We usually see a handful of projects every year, ranging anywhere from some kind of new construction to smaller sort of subdivision lot consolidation projects where people are just like moving a lot line or combining two lots together, things like that. Really anything larger than building a single family home needs to come through the planning office for approval. And there's a public process that we go through of multiple public meetings, multiple votes on projects. So there's plenty of opportunity for residents to be informed as well.
That's awesome. So it's not just a building starting and then being done and the residents aren't involved. It's all, there's a place for them in every step of the way. So how does development work? What's the process?
Yes. So generally speaking, projects need a preliminary approval and a final approval.
Okay.
So in other communities, their planning board or planning commission is only a recommending body, whereas in Mount Lebanon, our planning board actually has powers of preliminary approval on projects. So we shorten the process a little bit. So in theory, the shortest possible process would be a development project comes to the planning board. The board reviews it for compliance with our zoning code. We do a full engineer's review, staff review, all that as well as part of that. And then the planning board votes to grant preliminary approval. And then the project would come back to the planning board at a subsequent meeting for a recommendation for final approval, and then go on to our commissioners, our 5 elected officials, for the actual vote on final approval. In other communities where the planning board's only a recommending body, it has to go planning to the commission, back to planning, back to the commission. So there's 4 steps in the process. We just shorten it a little bit because our planning board has that preliminary approval power. But all of those meetings for us are open public meetings. The public can come and comment. The public can hear the developers' presentations. And we've been trying to take steps to put more information on our website as well about development projects that are happening in the community so that people can go online and find out information about what's being proposed. And for the most part, you know, I'll say that we do tend to get good resident turnout at our planning board meetings. The planning board meets once a month on the 3rd Tuesday at 7 o'clock in the municipal building, and you know, the agendas are posted online beforehand. We are somewhat at the whims of when people submit documents, so we can't force anyone to submit a plan for a project. But at the same time, when someone submits, legally we have deadlines based on the Pennsylvania Municipalities Planning Code that says, you know, they are entitled to a public hearing within so many days of submitting. Right. So I know we've gotten some questions of why is this project appearing before the planning board now? And it's like, well, they submitted, so they're entitled to a hearing. And then the planning board doesn't necessarily have to grant them the approval. They can table the project. We've had that happen quite a bit where we get an initial submission. There's a whole bunch of engineering comments that the developer has to address. So the planning board will table it, say, okay, you know, we're not going to vote yes, we're not going to vote no. We're going to give you some time to go back, fix these engineering comments, and then bring the revisions back to us at a future meeting, and then we'll consider them and vote at a future meeting.
So if I'm a developer and I have a plan, I have a project that I want to start, what's the first step? Where do I go? I bring it here, I say, hey, here's my idea, or do I bring it once it's already started and designed and everything like that? When do they start? When do they come to you?
Yeah. So the very first step is every Wednesday morning we have what we call our land use group meetings, which is an internal staff group of myself as the municipal planner, our planning and sustainability coordinator, Greg Wharton, Keith McGill, our municipal manager, Rodney Sarver, our chief building inspector, and Dan Deiseroth, our municipal engineer. And we meet every Wednesday morning, and those meetings are open to developers or people just interested in doing any kind of projects to come in and talk about their ideas with us as kind of a pre-development conference. And so they can come in before they actually submit anything formally. It doesn't cost anything for folks to come in and just talk with us and get some initial feedback on, okay, here's your idea, and this may work, this may not work, this is the sections of the zoning code you have to watch out for. These are as a sort of initial cursory review of the project. We obviously don't have any power to grant any kind of approvals to people, but we can say, here's some things to be cognizant of as you're working through your development plans before you submit something formally. And I think that developers like that step in the process, because then they have a chance to get some eyes on it and have some review from the people who know what the zoning code says. So that then they can, submit better plans when they actually submit, because the people we've seen that have just turned in plans to us and haven't met with us beforehand, they usually wind up with a lot of comments and things get tabled. They have to go back and address them, rather than if they'd come in and met with us first, we could have identified a whole bunch of things just by looking at them quickly to say, hey, here's all the things you need to watch out for before you submit formally.
What are things that you're looking at? What are you looking for, in those plans?
Yeah, so a lot of it is, our zoning code is very, very comprehensive on everything related to how things should get built in Mount Lebanon. And it is kind of the document that preserves the nature and character of our community. And, that is very important to us in the planning office, that we feel like it's somewhat incumbent on us to make sure that the look and feel of Mount Lebanon is maintained as the look and feel of Mount Lebanon. So there's everything from, how far from the street a building has to be set back, how tall buildings are allowed to be in different areas of the community, what use types are allowed in different areas. We have some areas that only single-family homes are allowed, versus some areas where you can do multi-story apartment buildings or commercial buildings or things like that. So we do have restrictions on uses in certain areas of the community. And then there are parking requirements that we look at depending on the type of use, dictates how much parking you might need, building heights, building setbacks, both from front yards, side yards, rear yards, all that kind of stuff that we look at to make sure that what's being proposed sort of fits within the standard of Mount Lebanon. And, there are, I'll say, some general guidelines that things can fit within. What we don't dictate is architectural style. So, I know some people have come to meetings and say, well, this looks horrible, how could you allow this? But, the architectural style is up to the developer that proposes the project. We do have guidelines for commercial buildings, you have to have a certain percentage of open window space on your first floor and things like that. But the type of roof that you have, or the slope of the roof, or things like that, we don't necessarily dictate that. Or even building materials. Obviously, we have a lot of brick and stone throughout the community, but that's not dictated in the zoning code that it has to be all brick or all stone or anything like that.
It's more like the setbacks, the traffic, things of that nature that you're looking at then.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
Well, let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue discussing development in Mount Lebanon.
Sounds good.
Welcome back to Inside Lebo. I'm Stephanie Hackey, and I'm here with Ian McMeans, our municipal planner, who is taking the role of answering questions today instead of the host for the show. So we were just talking about development, and you were telling me about how, the zoning code, what the requirements are in there. Now, who is the person that takes the zoning code and takes the project and says, hey, do these match and line up?
So that's myself and Greg Wharton in our planning office, along with our municipal engineers, when we get that formal submission of development plans. We'll take them and review them against the zoning code to make sure that everything they're proposing matches what's in the zoning ordinance. And if something doesn't match, then the process for them is actually to go to the zoning hearing board, which is a separate board that the municipality has. Rodney Sarver, our building inspector, is the staff liaison for that, and they have to request a variance, which is basically, if something in their plan doesn't comply with the zoning code, they have to get approval from the zoning hearing board to get a variance to have something built that doesn't comply. And the zoning hearing board sees all different kinds of variance requests. Some of them don't even come through the planning office. Some of what they see is, I'm going to put my air conditioner in on the side of my house, and my house is 5 feet from the property line, and I need to extend into that side yard setback. Things like that don't come through planning. But for larger development projects, we have seen a few things that if something doesn't fit with our ordinances, we either have to turn it down, or the developer has to go get a variance, or the developer has to amend their plans to fit what our standards in our code say.
So once you review all of that, where does it go from there?
It goes to the planning board for an initial vote,
Okay.
and then it's a vote on a preliminary approval. The planning board can either grant preliminary approval, table the project, or deny preliminary approval. There is, by Pennsylvania state law, a fairly high standard to meet to actually deny preliminary approval. To do that, you need to basically be able to say this plan doesn't comply with a certain section of our zoning ordinance or subdivision ordinance. You have to be able to point to specific things within the code that the plan doesn't meet. Typically what happens is if there's things that are mostly engineering comments, things that need more detail on, a lot of times we see, storm sewer systems that are being put in, stormwater management, retaining wall designs, things like that we just need additional engineering information on to review to make sure that, what's being installed is going to be installed at the capacity it needs to be in a safe manner. Typically in those cases, the planning board will table the project, let the developer, supply the additional information for a follow-up meeting, and then once they get all the information they need, then the planning board will vote to grant preliminary approval. And then the project comes back to another planning board meeting after that for a recommendation for final approval, and then it goes on to the commission for the actual final approval on the project. And then when a project is granted final approval, we also do a development agreement between the municipality and the developer, and as part of that, the municipality retains some money from the developer, usually either in a bond or a letter of credit, so that we hold on to some of the developer's money to ensure that if the developer walks away, any public improvements that were proposed, we have the ability to remedy at no cost to the taxpayers.
That's great. Yeah.
For example, we are still holding quite a bit of money from the Zamias project at the corner of Bower Hill and Washington.
Okay.
And I know that's one that gets brought up quite often.
Yep.
What's going on there? And to go back to something I said earlier, we can't force them to submit a plan for the site. We have, monthly contact with them. I reach out to them monthly to be like, hey, is there anything you want to meet with us to talk about? Do you want to submit something for us to review? But we are still holding quite a bit of their money in reserve. So that's kind of the stick that we have as opposed to the carrot. We try and offer things, but the stick is that we hold their money until they complete the project or file paperwork to walk away from it altogether. So we are holding money for them and a handful of other development projects throughout the community. And we do that because, if a project starts and let's say they're, putting in new sewer lines, putting in new sidewalks, things like that, and let's say the developer goes bankrupt and walks away, then we have some money in the bank that we can then use to fix the sidewalks, fix the sewer line, do the public improvements. We won't build the project, but we'll at least fix the public improvements so it's still a usable public street.
So we're not out of money whenever if they walk away from a project, basically.
Right. There's no liability on the part of the municipality. We're using the developer's money to do it.
In terms of projects then, what is underway right now? What's going on? What kind of development do we have?
Yeah. So on the commercial side, the FNB Bank project on Cochrane Road is under construction right now. Also under construction is the Castlegate Green residential development project. That's up at the corner of Midland and Dorchester. sort of across the street from Keystone Oaks High School, more or less, next to Seton LaSalle up there off of McNeely. It abuts Dormont and the city of Pittsburgh up there. That's an interesting little project. There's 51 housing units there. It's an agri-hood style development that they're going to have community garden space and a lot of green space within the development. And the 51 units up there are kind of mixed between townhouses, small garden apartment buildings. They're going to have an on-site management office so they can have, they're all rental units, so they're going to have on-site management all the time to do property maintenance and all that stuff. And then also working its way through the process, a plan for 5 duplexes on Pennsylvania Boulevard, so 10 total dwelling units. Got a recommendation for final approval from the planning board and should be coming to the commission sometime relatively soon. And that project is on basically the dead end portion of Pennsylvania Boulevard next to the Poplar T station stop. So as part of that, the developer actually has to improve the roadway up to municipal standards, as well as building their development. So the other 3 property owners on that street are now going to have, instead of a dirt and gravel roadway, a roadway that's up to municipal standards that the developer has to put in. Yes.
So sometimes this can actually improve the community and the neighborhood as well.
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. And how about in residential? Do we have anything there, or?
There's a handful of single family homes that are going in, but on the larger than that, the 5 duplexes on Pennsylvania Boulevard, the Castlegate Green stuff, that's mostly it on the bigger scale. I know there's a couple other places throughout the community. I don't want to give too much away because nothing formal has been submitted yet. But I know there's a couple other developers that are looking at some other residential projects throughout the community that hopefully they will submit relatively soon. I've met with a few people a few times that have some ideas, but that's one of those things where I can't make them submit something. So it's like, when you submit, we'll review it. And then we'll go from there. And once something is submitted to us, that's also when we start putting public notification out. So when they're going to be on the planning board agenda for a project, we will send notification letters and a copy of the planning board agenda to folks within a 500-foot radius of the development site. So that's kind of how people get notified about it. You can also just check the website and check the planning board agendas. But we do send notifications by mail to the addresses around.
So a big building isn't just going to pop up right next to you without you knowing. You're going to absolutely know if something's happening and something's coming to your neighborhood then.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yep. And that, a lot of times we hear at the very first public meeting on things, people say like, well, why didn't we know about this sooner? And it's like, well, we send out, when they formally submit documents is when we send out notification letters.
So basically it's all talk until they actually submit that formal document, and there's really nothing you can do until they submit that formal document. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep. Yeah, and once they submit things formally, those are available for public viewing. So if people want to come in and review development plans, they can just contact my office, and we can, set them up on a table. They can come in and look at them. You can't take them with you because they're our public viewing copy that we have, but people can come in and look and see what's on the slate to be proposed as well during our normal business hours.
That's awesome. It's pretty cool. You get to know about things that are possibly coming to the neighborhood way before it actually happens then. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yes. Is there anything else you want our residents to know about this?
I'd say, the perception of Mount Lebanon is that we are a mostly built out community, which is pretty true. But I think the fact that we still have interest from developers in building things here, whether it be, small residential projects that are duplexes, townhouses, things like that, up to, St. Clair Hospital putting a, $100 million plus addition onto their facility, really speaks to the quality of our community, and that people want to make investments here because they like Mount Lebanon and want to be in Mount Lebanon. The challenge is usually just finding a location that works for them, because being a mostly built out community, a lot of our remaining open locations are topographically challenged a little bit and require some additional engineering and site work to be able to build on. So there are some challenges to build here, but I think it's always encouraging to see the continued investment that outside developers want to make in our community.
Absolutely. And one more thing, the time frame. How long does it take to get through this whole process? Is there a time on that?
So there's not a time limit, but generally speaking, at a minimum, it's usually 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
But typically it takes longer than that, just because they have to go through at least 2 planning board meetings, assuming they don't get tabled. So that's 2 months right there, plus a commission meeting after that is another month. So, 3 to 4 months at the shortest, but typically we see, 6 to 8 months, because usually when a developer gets their, comment letter back with all the engineers' comments, it takes them a month or 2 to make all those changes to their plans and then resubmit, and we have to review and all that. So, usually I'd say a 6 to 8 month process, but the shortest possible is like 3 to 4 months.
And that's from when they submit the document, not from when they're just starting to think about it and all
Correct.
of that. I'm sure
Yes.
we've all seen projects that have been years in the works and we're all waiting for it. What's going to happen there? But it really doesn't start, the time frame doesn't start until they submit that document then.
Yeah, that's correct. And really, I should also add that that's just for planning approval. After they get their final approval and after they, give us their bond or letter of credit and developers agreement and all that stuff, then they have to go through the building inspection office for their review against the building codes and get their building permits. So that usually takes another month or so to get their building permits to actually be able to begin construction. So, that adds some time from, when we approve it on the planning side until when they actually get their building permits to start construction.
And then construction takes another however many years. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. That was very insightful. I learned a lot myself. And that's it for this edition of Inside Lebo, produced by Carrie Monyo, with music by Drew Monyo and graphics by Chris Leeper.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Inside Lebo, produced by Mount Lebanon's Public Information Office. Learn more about all things Lebo at mountlebanon.org or by following our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages.